that's the beauty of education. That's the beauty of reading. Read these books, engage these books, ask tough questions, but it doesn't come without risk.
Yeah. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGrow.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, we're always looking for topics of conversation, feedback, so please email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We definitely want to hear from you. Dave and Abby, it's summer, which brings a different kind of busyness.
Yeah.
But I know one of the things for each of us that we get to do a little more in the summer is a bit of reading.
Yeah.
And some of it has nothing to do with the work we do, and some of it is very specific to the work we do. And it's been a while since we've had kind of a book talk. Mm-hmm. And so today I'm just wondering, hey, what have you been reading this summer? Or maybe one book that you've been reading and how that's impacted you. And just some thoughts on it that we can share with our audience. So Abby, how about you? What's one book that you're reading or have read?
Right. So I chose to bring an education book, and I know the two of you did not, and that's fine. Mine is called Disrupting Thinking, and it's by Kylene Beers and Robert Probst, and I've used this in a grad course before. I've also used it to structure some professional development that I've done, but it's just a really excellent book that I feel like is appropriate for our time. Again, there's a lot of contentious issues in America right now, right? And
not in Canada.
Yeah, I know, the world. Okay, the world.
Yeah.
But I feel like as educators, and Christian educators in particular, it's important for us to think through how are we using education as formation, and how does reading factor into that? Wow. And Beers and Probst, I don't know their faith affiliation. I've never heard them talk about it.
Sure.
But their framework that they use and the point that they make in this book really resonates with me as a Christian educator. Yeah. And so their point is, it's called, again, Disrupting Thinking. And so basically their thesis is, if you're not reading to be changed, why are you reading?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
And so how can we as teachers create classrooms where our students are changed by, formed by the material that they interact with? Yeah. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? Mm-hmm. And how can we bring that purpose to the forefront of schooling? And I'm just going to read a little bit from the text here. So this is on page 50 in part 1 of this book. Okay, if our questions lead students to merely extracting, and if our primary goal is to check for the understanding that can be measured by how much they are able to remember, then children learn text after text, year after year, that reading is simply for answering, for extracting, for telling. It is not for becoming. And we will, for yet another year, not become a nation of readers. The reader we hope to graduate from our schools is one who is open to the possibility of change. To read with a commitment to remaining untouched, unmoved, unchanged is simply to waste one's time. New information, new arguments, new perspectives should offer the reader the possibility of sharpening and improving his thinking. This seems to be true whether that reader is thinking about the issues fiction often addresses, courage, loss, love, hate, and all of the others, or about the issues that nonfiction often raises, climate change, race relations, bullying, poverty, and all the others. Granted, not every text will change us. Some, perhaps many, will confirm what we already thought without offering us anything new or different. But if we approach the text with determination to ignore or reject everything it may offer, there's little sense in approaching it at all.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that good?
Yeah.
And so it just has me really thinking about how many people are stuck in that mode of, Louise Rosenblatt calls it a efferent reading, right? Just to extract information, just to prove points that we already think, and without the willingness to be changed by other people's perspectives or new knowledge, or we get so stuck in our ruts that we can't hear each other or have empathy with people, or and what role does education play in creating those kinds of people? And how can we as Christian educators take our role seriously in creating people who are empathetic and who are willing to be changed by new knowledge, and who are reforming, right? Who can take an idea, hear something new, make it better, be grounded in truth, yet always be open to learning more and thinking and refining our positions and thinking about how we should live our lives in response to our faith. And I think reading is such a huge part of that. And I know that we as schools sometimes do get so lost in can our students read that we lose sight of, but why are we doing it?
Right.
Yeah, it makes me, so yes and amen to all of that. Like that would be a deep hope when I think about reading. It really would be. My one question that I wonder about in Christian schools is because when I hear that, I right away think that is what it means to read for responsive discipleship, right? To equip our students to respond appropriately to the culture and engage the culture in which we live. And I think that is, for my background, coming from a Reformed Christian education, that's what it means, right? To be reforming, to engage the culture. My question that I wonder about today is if that's what some parents want. Not responsive discipleship, but status quo discipleship. Actually, to not read for change, but to use a word that they used is actually to read to simply confirm what our parents know to be true and to ensure that that is passed down to their kids. That we actually don't want transformation. We want it, but do we really want transformation?
We say we want.
Do we want to engage those big ideas? Because to engage big ideas around some of those complex topics
might lead your kids to come to different conclusions.
Conclusions. And do we really want that? And so it's interesting in hearing conversations about what we should be teaching in our schools, dictated by boards or state. It's also interesting to me then what we're saying we shouldn't be teaching in our schools. And when I sometimes hear conversations about what we shouldn't be teaching, I feel like we're teaching for confirmation more than transformation. And I say that as a parent as well. Like, I have to ask myself, do I want my kids to think differently than I do? And yes, I do, but how differently? And to think about that is like, because that feels like a risk, and yet that's the beauty of education. That's the beauty of reading. Read these books, engage these books, ask tough questions, but it doesn't come without risk. So anyways, that's my initial yes and amen. But
we kind of had talked about that on a recent podcast, right? About how to have those conversations. I think I mentioned the framework, right? Of you have to be willing to have, in order for true commitment to take place, there has to be some questioning or some crisis, right? Created in order for students to take on that belief as their own instead of just a shallow, this is what my parents always thought. But it has to be done in an environment where it's safe. And if our Christian schools can't be that place, right, then we're in trouble, I think. And so but it's a complicated question. How do we as teachers create that bedrock, keep that bedrock of truth while also allowing for enough engagement with big questions that our students can make their faith their own, and it's not just what's passed on and what my parents say.
And I think this is the complexity of Christian education. Because you have parents there who want confirmation, and you have parents there who want transformation, and you have parents who want a bit of both. And so I think that's what makes it difficult for school leaders, for school boards, even for school teachers, because you have all these different expectations put on this school And how do you balance that actually?
If there's competing interests within
There's
that,
competing
right?
interests, right?
Yeah.
Well, even when you were saying that idea of reading for information or for confirmation, like that struck me because it's like, how often isn't that what we tend towards, right? Like, yeah, so I want you to read this particular thing. Well, why do I want you to read this thing? And I've gotten better at that, of putting things in front of my students that I actually really strongly disagree with because I want them to read this and grapple with it. And so we can actually have a conversation. And that was not always my approach as an educator. But I still think a lot of students, and this is like university students that we're teaching, they assume that if I'm assigning it, it's because this is what I think.
I have students who are seniors who I did that same thing. I put something in front of them that really was not to be trusted, right?
Yeah,
it was a bad example. And the realization when they kind of realized I can question the text that a teacher puts in front of me, they had never considered that.
Yeah.
But it rings true, right?
Yeah.
For some of these people, or for these kids, they've never questioned a text. And I also think that's a disservice to our students.
That's right.
Right? Because then will they approach everything that's put in front of them as authority and not develop that critical thinking skill either.
And then how does that translate when you're sitting there watching CNN or Fox, or you're watching a documentary, or can you think critically about, right? Everything we watch, everything we consume, it has a bias.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And how do we
And if you
even
only
teach them to
ever
recognize
consume
that?
curated information, you don't develop that muscle either.
And if we want our students to be able to discern truth, they need opportunities to practice and develop that muscle.
Nobody's going to curate it for you when you're an adult.
It does make me wonder then if one of the important questions we need to have, even in our own department, so not just at a K-12, but even our own department here at our school, is what aren't we reading? Like what are our students leaving our school, leaving our classrooms with that we haven't discussed? And I think sometimes we focus on like, hey, I want to engage this text, but what aren't we reading? What topics aren't we talking about? What authors aren't we putting in front of our students?
Yeah.
Because that also is sending a message to our students about what we value. What we don't read communicates what we value.
Absolutely.
It's the whole idea of hidden curriculum.
It is totally the idea of hidden curriculum.
Okay, so thanks for letting me talk about that.
Yeah,
this is interesting because the book that I brought, it has nothing to do with that, and yet the way our conversation went, I'm like, oh, this is kind of thematic. So the book that I brought is not an education book. It's called When Everything's on Fire. And the subtitle's Faith Forged from the Ashes. It's by Brian Zond, who's a pastor in Missouri. This is one of the more compelling books that I read this year, and he is speaking with a pastor's heart, and so it's written with that kind of an eye towards who is in the church today, and he's the whole idea when everything's on fire, who hasn't felt some sense of that over the past couple of years, right? Like the whole world that I knew feels like it's burning down around me. But his real point in this book, and I guess I would say this is a book about deconstruction, right, which is a buzzword. And I always wonder when I hear Christians talking about deconstruction, like what do they actually mean by that word? And I feel like in some circles, people mean deconstruction means you're walking away from your faith. Or in some circles, deconstruction means you're coming to actually own your faith and not just accept what was passed on to you. And that's why I say this maybe picks up on some of the same things that you were just talking about there, Abby. And I don't know how much self-disclosure I'll give here. I would say for myself, about 15 years ago, I went through a season of wrestling in my faith life. Yeah. And today, if I was using the language I maybe would call that deconstruction, right? Like the things that were passed on to me, and I was just asking a lot of questions, and I spent a lot of time reading the Bible in a very different way than I had in the past, right? And I went through, and what Zahn talks about in this book that I really like, he sometimes we think about deconstruction as like demolishing your faith, and he argues in the book that deconstruction is actually part of the process. Like if you think about doing renovations to a house, there's always some deconstruction before you end up with this new beautiful thing. And so his argument is, so imagine that you're building this theological house for Jesus. Yeah. Jesus lives and he sits on the throne here, and you've built this. Some of it's passed on to you, some of it's things that you've developed and learned for yourself. And then you start looking around this theological house that you have built for Jesus, and you're like, boy, we need some renovations here. And sometimes it means a fresh coat of paint, and sometimes it means you're looking at a whole wing and say, oh, that's got got to go. We're going to rebuild something here. And so that sense that he says faith forged from the ashes, the second half of the book really talks about that. Like, how do we find spiritual practices that actually help develop our faith in really healthy ways? And sometimes that means you're going to uncover things in those spiritual practices where you're like, yeah, what I thought I was doing here, I'm not actually faithfully following Jesus. And I'm going to reimagine faith that was passed on to me. I found it compelling. It's pastoral. It was encouraging. And I guess I would recommend it, but I would recommend if you're going to read it, like read it with a critical eye too. I think that's a valuable thing. It's yours and you're heavy, right?
Right. Absolutely.
One of the things I think of when I hear you talk, Dave, is this idea of renovations, right? And part of it is, I lived in what felt like a really old house before we moved to Iowa, and it felt like we were renovating that place for 20 years. But it was always interesting when I had my brothers who were in the construction industry. Sure. They could see things in our house that needed renovating more than I could because they had an eye for it. And it does make me wonder, how do we sort of have a group of trusted mentors and friends that can maybe speak truth into our lives about things that might need to be reconstructed.
Right.
That we can't see it all for ourselves. I know that some of the moments that have led to great transformation for me, some of my own practices, were people having the courage to say to me, I noticed this, Matt. I wonder about that. Things that I would never see myself. And that takes a lot of courage for someone to say. That has to be a trusted friend. But then also for someone to walk through reconstructing with you. I don't mind the word at all. My worry, I don't know what the right word is how many people go through that alone.
Well, exactly.
And I think that to me is the whether that's happening in your church community, in your friend with your friend community. I think that's what concerns me more is like to do that alone.
Well, that's troublesome.
That would
problematic.
Problematic.
And I think that's where we should, in the church, have this sense of where we should be about making disciples. So what does discipleship actually mean, right? Like learning to more faithfully follow Jesus. Yeah. It's not just me and Jesus then, right? Like that happens through community, and it happens through conversation, I think, right? And our friend Justin Billy sometimes talks about that, right? Like we were a lot more comfortable in the church talking about spiritual formation today, right? Because discipleship, boy, that feels like a burden or something, right? And I think Justin's onto something when he talks about that, right? But really, we can't not be being formed spiritually. Everything going on in the world around us is shaping us in some ways in our spiritual life too. So how do we get really intentional about that? And for this book to start thinking about some of these ancient spiritual practices around reading scripture and around prayer and around fasting and things like that, like, boy, it's like an ancient modern faith kind of thing that you find yourself in then, right? Like, a lot of those things that we would have done in previous generations, maybe we're not so quick to do those things anymore because
it's the idea of formation again.
It is. Yeah. That's right. Absolutely.
How are we being formed by our spiritual practices? Instead of just knowing the right answer or extracting information.
That's right.
How are we letting ourselves be formed and changed?
Yeah.
Confirmation versus transformation. It comes back to that. But it's a good reminder though, Dave, too, like to think about then our moves in the classroom as teachers are not neutral.
Oh, that's right.
Like how like those, whether we want to believe that or not, if it's not neutral, then how we're setting up classrooms, how we address our students, everything from greeting and sending our students at the end of the day, our assessment practices are doing something to our students, right? So as you're talking, you're talking about deconstructing and reconstructing. I'm thinking about that even as a teacher. Sure. What do I need to deconstruct in my pedagogy, right? What needs to be reconstructed? Yeah. And I think, again,
who among us hasn't demolished a wing or two in our own pedagogical practices? And if not, I would argue you might need to.
All right, well, folks, the book that I recently completed was by Andy Crouch called The Life We're Looking For. It's Reclaiming Relationship in a Technological World. And I initially picked this up. I've read Crouch before, and I just have such deep appreciation for him. But I think what drew me to this is, we've used the language of the audio and the video not aligning, and I would say I really struggle with that in terms of what I hope my relationship with technology should look like, and what it actually looks like. And this desire, right, to be in, what does it mean to be in right relationship with technology?
That's an intriguing question.
Right?
For this,
Totally.
That's an oof, I think.
No, totally. It is an oof. And so this was one of the best books I've read in recent years, and it was one of the hardest. Because, again, it took going back to deconstruct, or just even being honest with myself.
But you're reading for change.
But reading for transformation, right? But even like his chapter titles, right? What we thought we wanted, the loneliness of a personalized world, heart, soul, and mind strength, what we've forgotten about being a person, how we trade personhood for effortless power. So it was really, even those titles, I was just like, oh, am I ready to take this on? And I think about that, right? Like I think we're created, and Crouch talks about this, we're created to be lovers. We're created to be in relationship with each other. And yet, right, and we live in a world in technology, I think that promises those things, right? Be in relationship with technology and you will receive this. And yet, the reality is that when our relationship with technology is not rightly ordered, it dehumanizes us, right? It makes us less than the people God has created us to be. And yet, we're drawn to it because we think it will make us more fully human. Right? So I just think about that. Even if you just think about the world, and I've never loved the mall, but right, when you're at the mall, you're at least among people, right? You're speaking to someone at in a store. You're rubbing shoulders with other human beings. Well, you don't even need to go to the mall anymore. Right? You can just do it all. You can do it all. And I do, trust me, probably way too much.
Guilty.
Right? You don't even need, I always laugh now when I hear one of my daughters talking on the phone. That's so refreshing to me. Right? My parents used to tell me to get off the phone. Now I long for my daughters to talk.
Just be on the phone.
Just be talking to someone, right? And so, right, you see how we've become less human. Right? Like now, now sometimes I go to the mall to get out of the house, right? Instead of going to the park or going to the coffee shop. Because you have to be a little more human at the coffee shop than you do at the mall. And so it was just really intriguing to me if I think about my own relationship with technology, quite honestly, my own relationship with my phone. If it's not in my pocket, I subconsciously touch my right pocket because that's where I keep my phone. And if it's not there, I look wildly like, where is it, right? And so, again, how is my phone and technology forming and shaping me as a person? And so Crouch kind of talks about these three shifts. He talks about he uses the language of redemptive moves that we can make in our life. So he talks about moving from devices to instruments, moving from family to household, and moving from charmed to blessed. And I'm not going to talk about all three of those, but one of the things that really resonated with me was this idea of moving from family to household. And initially when I read it, I actually was pretty defensive because we have just moved to a new community and I miss my family. That was the place where we knew we were known and we knew others, where we loved and we were loved by others. And we're living in a place in a small town where we're much more anonymous. But it also resonated with me in terms of this idea of household, because he talks about, in this chapter, he asks a really important question. He says, what kind of place do we require to thrive as persons? Right? And what if it's not our immediate family? What if it's this idea of larger households? And he talks about households. He's like, we need places where we can invest ourselves deeply in others, come to care about their flourishing, and give ourselves away in mutual service and sacrifice in ways that secure our own identities instead of erasing them. And he says the name for this kind of place I have come to believe is the household. And he goes on and says, this is the one thing we need more than any other, a community of recognition, that a household is a community of recognition. While we must always insist that every human being is a person, whether or not they are seen or treated as one by others, we also know that no human being can flourish as a person unless they are seen and treated as one. And for that, the household is the first and best place. We need a place where we cannot hide. We need a place where we cannot get lost.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I thought about that. I thought about that as a father or as a family living in a place where so many people have that built in. And yet how do you build that when you're not related to anyone?
And what is a school? What role does a school play?
Totally. And so that's
doing that.
So and that was my connecting point, right? Where we're in a, for us at a university, we have 1,400, 1,500 students walking around every day longing for household, right? Longing to be known. And so it just makes me wonder whether a kindergarten, middle school, high school, or university, right, is that how do we create households where students are known and know others? And I just love that, right? And I think about that for my own children now. Like we've been here for a couple of years, and we're slowly beginning to build a household. And one of the ways I thought about household we have a daughter in high school, that if we were not here, who can she go to that she can show up at the door unannounced and either knock on the door or not even knock on the door, just walk in and people are happy to see her, whether in a time of need, a time that those are the places. And how do we create classroom space where when students walk through the door, there's a sense of we're so glad you're here. Yeah. It wouldn't be the same without you.
Right.
Yep. That just delight in their personhood.
To delight in their personhood. Yes. And I guess I was encouraged because it made me realize, as much as I miss my immediate family, I don't need them for us to experiencing being part of a household.
Yeah, so hearing you talk about household, Matt, reminds me of, I just have to tell this beautiful story. I love a small town. It's where I grew up, right? And there's a sense of being known there that sometimes is hard, very hard, right? But it has a flip side that we experienced in a lovely way last week. My 11-year-old Harper was she was going to between her summer rec activities, and she was just walking, and poor thing, she has one of those sling bags, and it got caught between her feet, and she fell in the middle of the road, broke her wrist. Oh. Right, we didn't know obviously right away that it was broken. She tried to get up, fell back down on her face, middle of the street, right? And these two women who were walking, they were just going for a walk together on the side of the road, helped her up, got her to the side of the road, talked to a homeowner right there, got her some ice. She knew my cell number, called me, right? First they called my mom, because both of them, of course, had my mom's phone number in their cell phone. She was at the dentist, right? So called me. Harper knew my number, called me. I'm like, I'm in Sioux Center. It's going to take me 20 minutes. We'll sit with her.
Wow.
And so by the time I got there were these two women who had distracted her and talked to her and comforted her. The summer rec director was there at that point too, telling me you need to take her in with his eyes, right? His son had just had a broken wrist, so he kind of knew what we were dealing with there, get her in, but just encouraging her, keeping her spirits up, and just being with her and investing part of their day in this kid.
But so I like that language even right there, Abby, of investing part of their day in this child.
And she was lovely. Pam was lovely. She was like, I don't have anywhere to be. I'll just be here with her. It was just lovely. And Harper and I went to them both, to the two ladies the next day, and to Adam, to the summer rec director, and just gave him a little token. But to see, one of them greeted her with a hug. I think it was the first time they had ever met the day before, right? And just the way that they were able to pour in to her through that exchange, it just made me really thankful.
It's beautiful.
That to me, that's a living example of household. Oh, thanks for sharing that. So I really appreciated that. To go to places to move away from places that dehumanize and technology that dehumanizes into relationship that allows us to become fully alive as children of God.
Such a fascinating touch point. These
It
books
is.
kind of flow on to the next here.
Yeah.
Great conversation, friends.
Yeah.
Friends, we know your time is valuable and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. Whether it's this day, this week, or this month, we hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And we'd like to send you from here with this blessing. So to our listeners who we love so much and are so thankful for, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful week.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Those work together really well.
That was
Yeah.
fascinating
Yeah.
to see.
Totally. That's
They all
pretty
just
good.
touched
Touched each other, yeah.
Yeah.